Kelsey. This is my channel, The Fancy Hat Lady Reads. I'm wearing one of my fancy booktube hats. And today I'm bringing you my wrap-up for the month of August. I read, 7 things in August. I didn't get to everything I wanted to get to, but in retrospect, that's not too shabby. The first book I read I started at the end of July and then finished in August, and this was The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky, which was finally released in physical form in the US. It had been available in ebook, but we didn't have a print copy. I don't have an e-reader, so I was waiting to be able to get the print copy from my library. Now I'm showing you the UK cover here because I like it way better than the American cover design, and I get to do that because I'm making the video. This book has been very popular amongst sci-fi readers on BookTube for a while, so I was very eager to get my hands on it. It's about the crew of a wormhole tunneling ship called the Wayfarer, and they get this big job to punch a wormhole to this system where there are these warring clans, and an alliance has been formed with one of the warring clans. But for technical reasons, they can't do the punch straight to the planet from where they are, which is more central. They have to take this long way around to get there and punch back. So this is the story of everything that happens to the crew of the Wayfarer on the long way to a small angry planet. The story starts when a young woman named Rosemary joins the crew of the Wayfarer as a clerk. The summary of the book makes it sound like she's really the main character of the story, but in fact this is really like an ensemble story. It's a little bit about everyone on the ship, and everyone gets their chapters in the spotlight. I've seen other people point out that it's less plot-driven and more episodic, and what struck me about this means of storytelling is that it was basically, I feel like Becky was taking her time in order to show all of these different aspects of life in this world. This is a multi-species society in which humans are, only one of the minor species, and it's an interspecies crew of the ship, and everyone on the ship has these vastly diverse experiences of the world. And what she does so well is uses each of these characters and the things that happen to them and the things that happen to the crew as a whole that aren't directly related to the plot of getting to this planet and boring this wormhole. She uses them so that you can see enough of the world so that by the time they get there and stuff goes down with this wormhole, you have all of this context within which to place these events. And so I felt like it wasn't just a portrait of this crew and all of the different people on the ship. It was using those people as a sort of microcosm to explore this futuristic society as a whole. And I'll admit that at times it felt a little contrived to me, but for the most part I really appreciated it and I really enjoyed it, and I gave it 4 stars. Anyways, the second thing I read in the month was The Queen of Blood by Beth Durst. This is an advance copy that I got from the bookstore where I volunteer. I had actually never read an advance copy of a book before. I've had them available to me from this bookstore for a while, but it's frankly never really appealed. They don't always have something that I think I'm interested in. And I also value looking at reviews of things in advance and seeing if I think a book is going to be something I'll enjoy. And then there are just so many books that are already published that I have stacking up to read. It just seems frivolous sometimes. But I really enjoyed this experience of going into this book without any preconceptions built up from seeing other people talk about it. And while on the whole this was a book that was like a 3 stars, it was fine, I enjoyed it, but sort of book for me, I ended up feeling like I was really able to have a lot of coherent thoughts on it that I was certain were my own. I knew that I wasn't getting these thoughts or opinions from, outside sources and then thinking they were mine. So this comes out a little later this month. This is going to be the first book in a new epic fantasy trilogy by Sarah Beth Durst called The Queens of Renthia. I thought that this book actually worked as a standalone pretty well, though, with some slight qualms. But the story in this book is fairly self-contained. This follows a girl named Delena, and she lives in a world where the nature spirits of the land are malevolent towards humanity and would destroy humanity, except that the queens of each of these countries are able to keep them at bay, and it's only girls who are ever born with the magic to control the spirits. So only women can be queens, and it's not inherited through lineage. There's this extensive training and grooming process for magical girls to become potential heirs. This book takes place entirely in one country. It's called Arate, and it's a wooded nation. And it was a really cool setting because the infrastructure and architecture in this country is basically made out of trees and up in trees, so a lot of the action of this book is like actually taking place up in trees. But what I liked most about this book was the protagonist, Delena. She has magic, but not very much, and she's determined to do as much as possible with the little magic that she does have. I think that's a really cool twist on like the magical girl out to save the world type of trope. I felt it was very relatable to me personally. The writing of this is completely competent and polished, but there were some things in the storytelling that felt a little odd to me and kept me from being totally invested in what was happening in this book every step of the way. I feel like I should do a full review of this book closer to the release date, which is a little later this month, but I almost never do a full review for a book that is one book in a series. So I think what I'll do is I'll end up combining this in a review with another book that I'm reading right now that is also a first book in a series that's coming out this month. And I think that will give me like a full video's worth of material to talk about. The next thing I read was Necessity by Jo Walton. This is the third book in her Thessaly trilogy. This also I got from the library and it has already gone back. But I've already done a full series review for this trilogy, so instead of talking about the third book in the trilogy at length here, I'm just going to direct you to the series review if you're interested. This has both sci-fi and fantasy elements. There are Greek gods, it's about Plato's Republic, there are robots, there's time travel. Go watch my review if that sounds interesting. And then the next thing I finished was Abhorsen by Garth Nix. This is the third book in this trilogy, which I have here in a bind-up, the first two being Sabriel and Lyrael. I've read these very spaced out. I don't know if I was maybe just in the wrong mood for this when I read it. I really did genuinely enjoy the first two. This third one, though, I felt like there was nothing wrong with it. There wasn't much that appealed to me personally in it. It was the climax of the big action stuff that was set up in the second book. This is kind of like, it's kind of a standalone and a sequel duology. It follows all the same characters from Lyrael, and I liked those characters and I liked meeting them in the second book. I don't feel like much happened to them that was interesting to me on a personal level in the third, though, and we didn't really get to meet any new characters in this book. It was very focused on all of the action and the save the world from the evil Destructo thing and all of the dead things and flee from the dead things, hide from the dead things, fight the dead things. If that's what you're into in this trilogy, you're gonna be happy with the third book, I think, but that isn't what I've liked about this trilogy so far. So yeah, I'm a whole lot more interested in the character development and also in the world that's presented here and the societal issues. Now this bind-up also has the short story in it, Nicholas Sayre and the Creature in the Case. It looks like it's longer than it is because the print in this part of the book is larger than the print in the rest of the book. I did read this story as well. I enjoyed it a little more than I enjoyed the third book in the trilogy, even though the second half of the story is basically just a glorified chase scene. It did focus on the character of Nick, and one of the things that frustrated me about the second and third books is that he's a character that I'm very interested in, but he spent the majority of those two books basically unable to do anything of his own free will, and that just was not so interesting after a while. I feel like I'm going to butcher the name of the country, which I've been avoiding pronouncing until now. This takes place entirely in Enclestiere, and I liked that. The thing that fascinates me most about the world building of this series is the relationship between these two countries, which behave almost as if they're in completely different worlds. And a lot of the time that's just used as like this plot gimmick of, oh, people in Enclestiere don't understand our old kingdom magic and it makes it hard to cross the border and stuff, and that's often just used as a plot device. And I kind of wish this series had gotten more ground out of the whole concept of these two countries that exist like they're in completely different universes. Now there is a prequel to this series called Clariel, which I haven't read, and there is a new book coming out like this month, next month, sometime soon. Maybe it's out already, I don't know. That is a sequel book, a continuation of this series that follows Lyrael and Nick. So I don't know if I want to read those two books or not. I would love your input if you've read Clariel or if you're planning on reading Golden Hand, whether you think I should go for that or not. I've read some of the early Goodreads reviews on Golden Hand that say like, oh, this book is not so good as the others because there are no battles with evil dead things. Where are the battles with the evil dead things? And I'm kind of like, oh really? You have my interest now. So maybe I will actually want to read that book. I don't know if Clariel is like a prerequisite reading for that, and I'll want to do some research once that new book comes out to figure out if that's the case. Anyhow, I only gave Abhorsen 2 stars. I didn't rate Nicholas Sayre and the Creature in the Case because it's a short story and I don't do that. Okay, the next thing I read was Every Heart a Doorway by Seanan McGuire. This has been getting a huge amount of praise on BookTube, and I see why. I was a little worried to pick this up because I did know going in that there were some things that were probably going to be challenging for me. This is a novella. It's very short. But the things that were going to be challenging for me was I knew that this was going to have some very graphic, gory content. I knew that it was going to turn into a murder mystery and that there were going to be multiple murders and dismembered corpses. And that is one of the cases where when people say not for the faint of heart, I should listen, because in that sort of instance, I frequently am the faint of heart. But I couldn't pass up reading a book with this premise. This is about a boarding school for children who have gone on adventures in portal fantasy worlds and come back, and they're having a hard time assimilating back into the real world. Frequently they've changed and their parents don't understand what's happened to them and they want their little child back the way they were before they went to this other world and had just life-changing experiences. This book is actually similar, I think, to The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet in that it is a sort of ensemble story. The protagonist is ostensibly Nancy, who comes to the school at the beginning of the book after having spent time in a land of the dead. But this is also a book where you get to learn a whole lot about other people's perspectives, and I feel like Nancy's story is not necessarily, you know, the central emotional grounding of the whole book. It's everyone. And this is also a diverse cast of characters. Nancy is asexual, there's a transgender boy, there's a Japanese girl. And apart from those basic categories of diversity that are like what we have in the real world, we can check these boxes, there's also this, diversity of these people's experiences, having gone to different worlds, that each of those worlds spoke to their soul and changed them and helped them become something that was maybe truer to themselves. One of the most interesting things about this book is that it follows a central group of characters, most of whom went to generally unpleasant or dark or creepy worlds or like dead worlds. And they are all sort of misfits in this school where a lot of people went to, you know, frothy fairy tale lands. The characters that I was personally most drawn to in this book were Jack and Jill, the twins. One of them has become a mad scientist, and the other one has become this aloof ingenue. And their story to me was a lot about the sort of expectations that we put on women, wanting to put women in different boxes and put labels on them that end up limiting their potential. So yeah, this book has a lot to recommend it. I could not tolerate the dismembered corpses, and I'm not necessarily consistent in my toleration of blood and gore, my toleration levels, which is part of the reason that I do keep trying books that I know are going to have some of this kind of content, because sometimes it doesn't bug me, and I think it depends a lot on the writing style. Despite being a sort of fairy tale thing, this is actually, Seanan McGuire has something that struck me as a very blunt writing style. Some of the characters speak in sort of the heightened language of their fantasy worlds, but most of the narrative tone of this is sort of blunt and stark and gritty in a way that it did not help me get over my thing with the body parts. Let's just put it that way. So I only gave this 3 stars when I read it. It's the sort of thing, though, where it gets, like, rosier and rosier in my mind the longer it goes since I finished this, because the characters did stick with me, their stories did stick with me, and the dismembered corpses have sort of faded into the background of my memory. So this is a book where my opinion of it improves with age, I think. This is actually going to be a series of novellas, and I am so conflicted as to whether or not I will read the second one, because the second one is going to be a prequel story about Jack and Jill, my favorite characters, and what happened when they went to their fantasy world. I love these 2 characters. I really don't know if I could tolerate reading an entire story set in that world that they went to. Let's just put it that way. So I'm just going to wait and see on that one. The next thing I read was Bitter Greens by Kate Forsyth. This is a book that is a historical fiction novel that has, I thought it had 2 different narratives. It has 3 narratives about the history of the Rapunzel fairy tale. It is so intricate and so detailed, and there's so much in this. I ended up taking like 2 whole weeks to read this, and I wasn't disliking it. It wasn't slow in that way, but there is a lot of heavy stuff in this with good reason. And I think I'm going to do a full review on this, because I have plenty to say about this, because I spent so long reading this book that I think I have enough to say on it for a full review. I don't often have time in my filming schedule to do full reviews of individual books, or I haven't in the last couple months, and I would really like to get back to doing that, so I think I am going to do a full review of this. This starts out following a woman named Charlotte Rose Delforce. She is the writer whom we can credit with basically bringing us the Rapunzel fairy tale. She lived in 17th century France, and she wrote a version of the story. The book starts where she has been exiled from court to a convent for her scandalous behavior. We get flashbacks of different times in her life that sort of begin to draw the portrait of who she is. Meanwhile, at the convent, we learn how she hears of the Rapunzel story. We know there was a version of it that was an Italian version before she wrote her version, but we don't know, as far as I can tell, historians don't know how Charlotte Rose would have known this story, especially since she wrote her version while she was secluded in a convent in France. So the second storyline is actually this full-blown Rapunzel retelling that takes place in 16th century Italy. And then the third storyline that we get for a while is the story of the witch in that story. This is really an examination on several levels of how history has been incredibly cruel to women. I found it really powerful. It took me forever to get through, and I gave it 4 stars. Please watch out for my review, because now that I have committed to it on camera, I will have to do it. And the last book that I read during the month was my 5-star read of the month, and that was The Bell at Sealy Head by Patricia A. McKillip. This book, between these two, this is what bumped Son of the Shadows off of my TBR for the month of August, because I wasn't expecting this to take so long and I didn't know when I was going to get this from the library. I'm realizing that I really enjoy sort of subtle fantasy novels that take place in rural, small community settings. It's sort of escapist for me. I've always lived in urban areas, so there's something about reading about magical small towns that really appeals. And it's a sort of fantasy that I often prefer to the sort of fantasy where, oh my gosh, we're throwing magical fireballs at each other. There are no magical fireballs in this. That is not that type of magic. This is about a small coastal town called Sealy Head, where there is a bell that rings at sunset every night, but no one can tell where the bell sound is coming from. There's no physical bell. And the people in this town are used to it. This is just an everyday occurrence to them. We follow several different characters. We follow Judd, who is the young innkeeper in Sealy Head, and so he is the first to encounter the traveling scholar who comes to town to investigate the bell. We follow Gwyneth, who is a merchant's daughter who loves to write stories about the bell, having been out of town for several years in the big city to study. She's being courted by this silly rich guy in town, but she really likes Judd. And then there is this old manor house in town where the lady of the house is dying, and so they're going to have to send away for her heir. The maid of this house is named Emma, and ever since Emma was little, she's been able to open doors in this house and see this other world where there is another worldly princess living in an alternate version of the house. And she and this princess have become close friends, and it follows both of them. For the majority of this book, not a lot actually happens in terms of action or plot, and then when stuff does happen at the end, it's all still largely very mysterious and slightly vague. And I really like this sort of more mundane type of fantasy where there are these rich layers of magic in the everyday. Also, this is one of these ones with these gorgeous covers by Kinuko Y Craft, and there are all of these things on the cover that I kept staring at this cover more and more as I was reading it, and as I got further in the book, the more different things on the cover stood out to me and started to make more sense. I don't think there are like huge important themes or messages in this book. That's not really the type of book this is. It's more this, gentle rural fantasy with subtle romance, and I loved it. It was sort of just what I needed right at the end of summer. It was great. There are relatable characters going through small town drama with all of this inexplicable magic boiling under the surface. Anyhow, that was everything I read in August. Let me know if you read anything that you were particularly excited about in August. Let me know if you've read any of these books, if you want to share any thoughts on them. I would love to hear from you. Anyways, that is all. Bye for now.